some meeting of the minds in terms of the different scientific disciplines that relate to climate change. It's my pleasure to introduce Charlie Walthall. I've known him for a number of years, and it's really the first time I looked at his bio. It's very diverse. He started as a geography major at the University of Maryland, went into forestry, and then went on to get his PhD in remote sensing at the University of Nebraska at Lincoln. And I think that one of the reasons why Charlie has been such a success is because he does have that kind of diverse background. And that's really a benefit when it comes to doing this kind of work, because climate change isn't just a single focus on a single discipline at a given level. It's really global. And I think he brings that expertise and experience into his job on an everyday level. So it's my pleasure to introduce Dr. Charlie Walthall.
Well, good morning. What I want to talk to you about today kind of puts together a number of the themes I've been working with for a while that relate to climate change. And first I'll give you a little overview and then talk about some of the directions I think we can move. My title is a little different from what you have in your program. I apologize for not getting that correct. Anyway. Well, this is how I like to open things when it comes to climate change. Welcome to agriculture in the 21st century. We're faced with massive increases in the world population, 9+ billion by 2050, and this comes from lots of different think tanks. We did a briefing in the Office of National Programs from our intelligence community here. They said the one thing they could nail in terms of future projections is population. So it's pretty well bang on this type of stuff. We have decreasing land area for cultivation for various reasons. We have soil degradation, and those of you who are paying attention to what some of the conversations are internationally in terms of the environment, know that soil is coming up as something that's important for a variety of reasons. Water, big issue for the 21st century. Quantity and quality for a variety of uses. Nutrient availability and management, there are shortages of some kinds of nutrients. And its availability and its transport, its cost. We also have increasing production expenses. We're trying to do more with less. Challenges are such that the equipment is getting expensive. The inputs are expensive, harvest is expensive, we have labor issues and so forth. So, and then on top of this, we have the challenge of looking at our landscapes, not just for production, but looking at them as multifunction landscapes, and that includes ecosystem services, watersheds, airsheds, pollinators, recreation, things like that, a lot of which we all depend on, but it's overlooked. Popular media. So, if we look at the history of agriculture, we have this thing called the Industrial Revolution that occurred a while ago, where we've got mechanization into agriculture. We were able to cultivate very large areas rapidly. We were able to harvest rapidly. We moved into the Green Revolution that was focused on crop genetics, and this is continuing. With the range of new technologies out there for manipulation of genes and advanced ways of developing new varieties, we still expect to see some growth in this. The information revolution, as we've seen it play out, has been in terms of precision agriculture. Okay? We looked at the spatial and temporal variability of fields and the factors driving this. We were able factors limiting yields and bring up some of the lower lying areas, avoid some of the environmentally sensitive areas within the fields, and even out the variability across the field. So we have all these things working for us, and some of them are pretty traditional in terms of challenges. You know, we need to grow more, we need to grow nutritious food, we need to grow things that provide a variety of foodstuffs, as this poster will tell us here. And on top of this, we now have this thing called climate change. A stable climate under which agriculture has developed for quite a while is no longer there. And I'm pulling information from this document that in a moment of weakness I agreed to lead as a technical reference document for the National Climate Assessment. The U.S. Global Change Research Program is tasked with producing an assessment of the effects of climate change on the United States, all sectors of the United States, every 4 years. It's been done, I believe, 4 times since this was initiated about 1990. So what we did was we looked at the science literature on climate change in agriculture. We did a synthesis of what was out there. We ended up coming up with over 1,400 references. And this has been 1,400 references, a lot of them are new since the 2008 document. It's basically a chapter in a larger document. We wrote this as a foundation for risk analysis and as a baseline for the future national climate assessments. So we have, for the first time, we strong footholds in terms of what type of topics need to be addressed for climate change in agriculture, and hopefully it will provide a starting point for the future across a lot of expanded areas and topics. Now, my secret agenda for doing this was to create a community of scientists. Okay? I tasked some of my leading scientists in climate change and agriculture, some who were in agriculture who had no experience in climate change. And those are the people that we learned from quite a bit. They started looking at things differently from climate change scientists. And I created a community between them and the university and non-government organizations and industry partners that they were charged to find to co-author chapters with. So it's about half and half in terms of USDA authors and university, and we actually had one industry person and a number of people from NGOs. So we created a community. We had 55 contributors, and the conversations while we were producing this document yielded a lot of insights, a lot of education for all of us around. We're talking about people from different disciplines, soil scientists, talking to climatologists, talking to plant physiologists, talking to pathologists, talking to entomologists. So the discussions were quite revealing. We even had a very talented ag economist from the Economic Research Service. So we feel that was one of the reasons that this document is a successful piece of work. We'll have a number of the authors that are in the room today. This document does not include anything on mitigation. When I'm talking about mitigation, I'm meaning reduction of greenhouse gases from sources in agriculture, increasing carbon sequestration. So there is a task report, Council on Agricultural Science and Technology, that's listed there below as the source. And both of these documents are available online. Hope to find a good read. There's a lot of that. So, what are we talking about? We're talking about climate change effects on agriculture. Well, we broke it down into abiotic effects and biotic effects. For abiotic effects, the most notable thing that we're seeing are changes in precipitation patterns, spatially and temporally. Where they occur, where they don't occur, when they occur, within a season, between seasons, between years. Some places are going to be drier, other places are going to be wetter. If you look at the projections from the climate community, basically you can draw a line diagonally across the middle of the U.S., running from, let's say, North Dakota down to seen this in the news with signs of drought and floods. Okay, what a lot of people don't realize is this too much too fast is as much of an issue for agriculture as not enough where you're needed, when you need it. The bigger issue is the greater variability of precipitation. You'll notice a lot of our weather events, our rainfall events, are short, intense events that move through very rapidly, drop a lot of water in a short period of time, and then move through. The shift of the timing of the events, things are happening when they shouldn't be. I talked to some producers who had experienced rainfall during the fall when they're trying to harvest, and they get a quote freak rainfall event, which falls on their crop, still sitting in the field, and the whole thing develops a pathogen within 5 days. So things like that, and our ability to even get into the fields to plant, precipitation patterns in the spring. That's why some of your equipment that you're seeing for planting is getting bigger and bigger. This past year, 90% of the grain crops planted within the Great Plains were done within 10 days. 10-day period. Part of it is just access. It's too wet to get into the field. You have to look at temperature and things like that to do this as well. We can expect more severe weather events. We're experiencing one now, I would think. Hail, storms, wind, etc. So these are the types of things that get the attention of most people with the variability kind of falling out of understanding. If you look at climate, what is climate? It's means and extremes. We're seeing more variability in the extremes. And just to put it up front, as I said before, water is the big issue for the 21st century. Not only for surface concerns, but groundwater recharge and soil moisture. Because of these shortages, we're seeing competition between urban areas and agriculture. Southern California, for example, the agricultural areas are losing a lot of their water rights because, say, San Diego is buying them up to make sure their population has enough water use. So, not enough or too much. One of the things we looked at that was not in the prior report was the effect of climate change on our agroecosystems. The soil, for example, water and wind erosion loss. If it's very, very dry, wind erosion is going to be an issue. If it's very, very wet, obviously water erosion. This results in a loss of nutrients and carbon, essential for soil quality. And we're seeing some evidence that the soil biology functions are affected by these changing environments. Ecosystem services, watershed, groundwater recharge and its implications for irrigation, pollinator life cycles, the timing and shifts of populations, the air temperature is such that you get release of pollinators at a time that is not consistent when you need them in the field, say for like almonds and other things that rely very heavily on pollinators. That's a mismatch, and you won't get the pollination rates that you're looking for. Biodiversity, wildlife, in general, as I said, when I was working in the precision agriculture world, some of the farmers were looking at their landscapes and dividing up some of the areas for crop growth and other areas for hunting, for example. And in lean times, hunting leases would keep them afloat. In fact, in some of the situations, they were making more money from hunting than they were from crop growth. Carbon sequestration, another ecosystem service, not only contributes to soil quality, but also it's a service in terms of drawing existing greenhouse gases out of the atmosphere. And the recreation issue. You know, the wide open expanses out there that are watersheds used for various types of recreation. They're not conducive, they're not the kind of right environment. It's burning, for example, in the west. Landslide and things like that. Excuse me. It's going to curtail recreation. Now, the other major category of effects is what we call biotic effects. You look at changes of temperature and precipitation, you're talking about a change in environment. And that will have broad-reaching effects. We also have this issue of enhanced CO2 fertilization. Nobody can argue with the fact that the amount of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere is increasing. Well, when you think about plant growth, what do you need? You need carbon dioxide, water, sunlight. Okay? Well, if one of these factors changes, it will affect plant growth, in particular crop growth. And what we're finding is weeds. Weeds, in their genetic freedom, have been able to adapt to this additional CO2 that's out there and are becoming more and more vigorous. Ziska here, who introduced me, is this one of his areas of research, along with his colleagues locally and in Munson and Citrus. This is quite a surprise to many people. It also changes the carbon to nitrogen ratio within the plant itself, which has implications for resistance to pathogens and insects in terms of chemical signaling. There's some implications for the amount of lodging that may occur when this carbon to nitrogen ratio is off. So these changing habitats affect not only weeds and vines, but invasive plants, insects, pathogens, and animals. So everything is a little different in the biological world that's out there. This on the lower right. These two slides are from Blue, and he grew weeds in chambers, which apparently he says is kind of hard to do when you want to do it. He exposed a chamber on the left to what's current in our CO2, at least what was current at the time we did the work, current ambient CO2 levels. And then he exposed the chamber on the right to the ambient CO2 levels that would be expected in 2050. He then applied herbicides. And you can see on the current situation, it took the weeds back pretty well. When you look at the future scenario, the effectiveness was greatly reduced. What is the implication for this for growing crops? We're making pretty good headway. We know how to deal with some insects. There are some that we don't know how to deal with, and some various types of pathogens. But weeds account for a lot of yield loss around the world. They're a big challenge. So we have to rethink this. Also, with these changing habitats and the rising low temperatures at night, we're not getting the die-off of weeds and insects. Kudzu, for example, has to be exposed to temperatures of something like 12 degrees Fahrenheit for 10, 12 days for it to die off. So as the low temperatures, your nighttime temperatures rise, these kinds of things are able to flourish. So kudzu is moving northward. So another issue is with the enhanced CO2 fertilization, you get a flush of biomass. The green biomass grows faster and flourishes well. The issue is, and this is a major issue out west, where 70% of our western lands are in some kind of grazing, is that the plants are growing so fast that they're unable to satisfy their need for nutrients. So you're getting nutrient poor forages. So the cattle folks out west are wondering if they need to supplement nutrition of cattle grazing out west. Major expense, major logistical issues. Look at these biotic effects. I personally look at things overall. I think these are the ones you need to be paying a little more attention to. And how these things interact, the interaction of the effects of CO2 and temperature and precipitation changes on things like weeds, various types of vines, insects, pathogens, and so forth. And build these types of things into our climate change models that are linked with crop growth models, for example. Well, I hinted at some of the beneficial effects. There are there. We have a reduced incidence of frost if you discount some of these spikes because of the variability. Some pests and pathogens experiment with this a lot further. So we have better red corn. This is an example of the flush environment. You see root growth, which helps deal with things like drought and whatnot, stability of the plant, dealing with severe events. So there are some beneficial effects. In fact, some of the research going on here at BART is looking at this enhanced CO2 fertilization effect and seeking to understand it so that we can incorporate that into crops. These biotic stresses, the insect test, we're seeing greater numbers.
Okay. So we're seeing the greater numbers in some locations. With its, is that too loud? It's pretty good now? Okay. But like I'm loud. Because you have greater numbers, and say within a longer growing season, you have multiple populations, you have a greater propensity for increasing insecticide resistance. The geographic ranges will increase and decrease depending on the particular critter. And this also has implications for imports from foreign sources. The Animal Plant Health Inspection Service, the people who keep our borders safe from various types of pathogens and insects that reach our borders from overseas with imported food, they are concerned because climate change being a global phenomenon, they are very concerned that they're going to see more incidents of pests and pathogens. And if you look at the amount of imports versus the number of inspectors that have been brought on board in the last, say, 10 to 20 years, the numbers do not match up. So they're looking at ways of hopefully predicting, using some models, of the probability of the occurrence of pests at particular locations around the world, and then tracking where those fruit and vegetables will end up coming into the U.S. and to be able to move more inspectors to that location. So they're very interested in risk management, using the results of predictive science from agricultural climate change science. Pathogens. We're looking at these changes of habitat, of being a change to the host pathogen responses. Plants, insects, non-crop reservoirs, for example. I believe with kudzu harbors a pathogen that's a problem for soybeans, for example, and if it's running wild, its pathogen ride-alongs are going to flourish as well. And as I showed in the slide before on weed resistance, cultural control measures for these types of issues may be less reliable as well. And, of course, we all know extreme events can spread these things. Years ago, I had contact with some climatologists and meteorologists that were looking at the effect of changes in location of various types of air masses and how much they carry in terms of pathogens and insects from one part of the country, I mean regional differences, to another. And when you have more extreme events, obviously you're moving a lot more air, and so these things are going to be transported a lot easier and perhaps even farther. And as I said before, the weeds increase vigor, the herbicide resistance. And we will experience some range increases and decreases, depending on the individual's capacity in terms of the weed to be able to deal with its environment. So the bottom line, which you can't really see down here below, is these things are going to affect the cost of production. Think about it. What are your inputs into production? Well, there's water, there's fertilizer, there's the seed. Once you're growing it, what are you spending money on to deal with? Insects, pathogens, weeds. So we can expect our costs of production to go up. Livestock is also vulnerable. Livestock we expect to be affected And you can start with their food source, grain and forage. There's that quantity and quality decrease, like the rangeland situation. And of course, production cost increases to deal with these effects. Animals are just like human beings. Heat and humidity affect them the way they affect us. It produces growth, production, and reproduction, okay? And that affects meat, dairy, eggs. And well, the obvious thing is, well, let's build climate-controlled production facilities. There's your cost again. You have to build new facilities, you have to keep it cooled and humidity controlled. Okay, there's your cost again. Diseases and pests, frequency, intensity, distribution, just like with plants. There are some documented cases of some diseases like blue tongue in Africa moving into Europe for the first time. And so you also have to look at the predators and competitors of these things and the vectors of anything that would affect an animal in terms of the insect that carries a pathogen and the pathogen itself. So there's lots of opportunity for modeling and measurements and synthesis of different information from different communities. Okay, and this chart shows that temperature and relative humidity effects. You'll see it: no stress, mild stress, distress, severe stress, and then fatal. Extreme events. If you look at records of insurance going back 10 to 15 years that the insurance industry puts out, they usually put the leading loss indicators, and it could be housing, it could be transportation, it's agriculture, whatever. Agriculture is showing up more and more frequently with larger and larger dollars. These are just some of the examples that are out there. You look at these things, and it's alarming how much agriculture does appear as a major recipient of insurance because of changing climate. And the caveat down here at the bottom, extreme events have been shown to be more probable, but you can't look at any individual event and attribute it specifically to climate change. So you have to look at the long term. But the numbers are showing up, and they are making some sense. So the take-home messages. We are seeing some effects, and they are going to continue, both abiotic and biotic. We can expect it to affect yield quantity and quality. And it will affect the cost of production. We expect the effects of climate change to intensify beyond 20 or 30 years. Things are getting more and more variable as we go on. And there's the effect, what I call generations. Future farming and climate will be different from what we know now or what we know in the past. Future generations of farmers are going to be faced with climate situations that their predecessors had no experience with. This means that risk management will incorporate more and more climate and weather into their decision making, pre-season, between season, and during the season. Okay, this is new, the next generation. Natural resources base is at risk. The soil, water, and air that we need to produce crops and livestock, as well as what's needed for urban areas, the rest of it. And then ecosystem services are at risk, pollinators and biodiversity. So these are the basic messages that we've come to realize out of this report. There's lots of other details behind it, but these are the big ones that I like to get across. One of the messages I send out when I talk to farmer groups, production groups, is just start paying attention to your extremes as well as the means when you do your preparations. Look at what the possibilities could be for extremes of temperature, what are the possibilities for extremes of precipitation. And for precipitation, it's also the forms, how much snowfall, how much snow melt you're going to get, what's the intensity of the rainfall, and the timing throughout the season. So it'll give you a little more versatility in dealing with these things. For adaptation, some of the conclusions. Current practices can offset some of the effects of the next 20 or 30 years, but not all. When you think about producers, they're a pretty inventive bunch. I mean, when you talk to farmers and say, well, I have a problem, well, I figure out a solution, I go do it. I talked to a group in the Midwest, and I asked them, are you doing anything that changes the way you do business because of climate? And a guy came up to me and says, yeah, I live along the Missouri River, I'm building berms, so I won't get flooded again. Okay. We're seeing tile drain systems in places we've never seen them before. That's the reports I get from my scientists out in the Midwest. So the versatility of and the resilience of producers will carry us for a while. However, at some point, it's going to get beyond what the individual farmer can do, and it's going to require cooperation among the different layers of agriculture that we have in the United States, whether it's the local community, the dealers, the machinery developers and sellers, the fertilizer people, the seed people, and of course the extension people who advise on how to actually grow these things. When it comes to decision making, it's not real straightforward. There's the environment, economics, the social systems, all these interact to affect decision making and the consequences of those decisions. So it's a very complex decision making, as we all know. Decision criteria can include farm level, cost benefits, perception of risks, and access to actionable information. They're looking for things they can do. They want to know, what can I do to prepare me for short-term issues as well as long-term. In fact, they're more interested in the short-term right now. There is a role for adaptation planning and adaptive management. Okay? This is where that larger community beyond that of the individual farmer comes into play. Us. We need to develop both climate-ready crops and production systems. What we found was an overemphasis on genetic and genomics as a solution for climate change. And we're seeing anecdotal information from the field for the drought year before last, where some of the super hybrids that were supposed to be drought resistant and resilient did not do as well as some of the traditional varieties because of the way they were managed and because of the way the soil was managed. If you don't have any soil moisture available, it doesn't matter how great a variety you have. So production management practices need to get some more attention and emphasis. And so what we decided or looked at and determined was that we need a balance of research. It's balance between genomics and the environment and management. What I call G by E by M. And we're all familiar with G by E. That's been the tradition. We're adding management into that. And one of the board scientists here, Jack Meissinger, suggested probably genomics plus environment plus management squared. You look at the whole system. And so we have to ask ourselves, can enhanced rates of crop improvement be realized by a more integrated approach of this G by E by M? Now, my colleagues at the Office of National Programs are actually picking up on this G by E by M. And some of the silos that we have that occur because of disciplinary traditions are breaking down. We're asking each other questions. You know, if I have this type of seed, for example, that will respond this way in an environment, what can we do in terms of the production practices to enhance that particular seed's ability to grow and give us the quantity and the quality of the yields that we want. So how do we do this? How do we deal with the adaptation? This was mainly the big reason why I took on this report. I wanted to see, how do I organize my program? How do we organize as scientists, the scientific community, to deal with adaptation? Well, the IPCC in 2001 published this bit of an equation. They said we need to address the vulnerability of agricultural climate. Vulnerability is a function of exposure, sensitivity, and adaptive capacity. Understanding the exposure, what parts of agriculture can be affected. And with the G by E by M approach, it goes beyond just the plant. Okay, you think about the The biotic effects, it goes beyond just the crop. Understand the sensitivity. How much will agriculture be affected? This is where your work to be able to predict an outcome of, say, the effects of environment or management on a crop or an insect or a pathogen will come in handy. You all familiar with the AgMIP project, Agricultural Model Intercomparison and Improvement Project? This is a worldwide effort that's almost, it's pretty well a bring your own resources effort to bring together the modelers of all types of crops together to work as a community for the first time. And the object is to bring up the sophistication of these models and then link them to general circulation models so we can do climatic projections, couple that to growth models, and see what realistic effects we can expect on crop growth in the future under different climate change scenarios. That's what this is about. What's lacking are interactions with insects, pathogens, weeds, and so forth. It's purely focused on yields right now. So there's a geospatial component. You'd like to be able to do maps of this. So there's remote sensing and modeling being linked with data planes of soil type and drainage and so forth. It's the eventual goal. And finally, enhance the adaptive capacity. Strengthen how agriculture can adjust and moderate potential damages, take advantage of opportunity, and cope with the consequences. So this is where, what is the farmer doing? What does industry do? When somebody comes to us and say, well, we want to develop a new type of crop that will flourish in an environment, well, we have to look at that G by E by M to be able to do this, because the M comes down to what someone does in terms of their behavior in producing a crop or an animal. So how do we enhance this adaptive capacity? Here we go, G by E by M. Genomics, environment, the abiotic and biotic effects on agriculture brought about by climate change and the effects of agriculture on the environment. Okay, we have a responsibility to make agriculture less impactful on the environment. And management and production practices. There was an article in the CSA News, Crop Science Society News, last year that talked about this G by E and adding in the M. And a big part of it was focused on soil management. Okay? The theme I'm pushing today. It was actually one of our scientists out in Ames, Iowa, was talking about this. And from my perspective, as a guy who sits running a nationwide agricultural research program, I get a lot of people who represent nutrient companies. They make a product, and there's the snake oil salesman part of it, but every once in a while you get someone who has something that looks like it's going to work. And they come in and they say, we don't know why this is working. And if you look at the nutrient management industry as a whole, there's all these different forms out there. There's intermediate, there's organic, there's liquid, there's encapsulated slow release. There are inoculants to boost the microbiology that's beneficial to crop growth. There are paired inoculant crop combinations. I had a company come talk to me that they are developing these types of things for Africa, for example. And they are either selling the inoculant to the farmers at little or no cost. They even donate it to them. And you can cultivate enough inoculant for a huge area in a shoebox. That's the quantity that you need. And they are basically giving it to them in exchange for their carbon credit trading rights. So that's where they're making their money. And they wanted to work with us on this type of thing. One thing that's appearing in the literature, in the discussions, are that there's a big emphasis on soil biology and how a lot of these things, the ones that work, maybe soil biology oriented. So we're calling these biotic further. I think this is showing great signs for sustainability, promising signs, as one of the solutions. But we don't understand why these things work or how these things work. You know, soil biology is in its infancy. It's still in its descriptive stage. You measure the soil biology, go out and apply some treatment to the field. At the end of the season, measure what the changes in the soil biology was, and you just describe what it is. For a lot of these organisms, we do not know what they do. Okay, so it's a very exciting field, especially with the ability to employ some of the genomics technology we have out there that have been developed for crops. So when we look at soil health, physical, chemical, and biological, there's mounting evidence that points to the benefits of managing soil biology. So this, once again, gets back to your crop genomics plus management practices, to develop new management practices that focus on soil biology. So when I sit in my office and I think about the Industrial Revolution and the Green Revolution and the Information Revolution, I'm wondering if this is the next revolution for agriculture. It's going to be a pretty tough one to push forward, but I think we can do it. I think when people ask me out there, you know, are we smart enough to figure out this climate change thing in agriculture? Yes, I think we can do it. We have the will, we can do it. And then there are things like this, these new frontiers in science, that are going to get us there. But for us as scientists, this is going to be a challenge to how we do business. Okay, this G by E by M is going to require more collaboration and development of communities. You'll notice that's what I did when I did this report that I'm drawing this information from. That was my goal, because the interactions produce lots of insights. So, can we staff some of these challenges that we face with multiple disciplines? If you go to the Mayo Clinic, for example, one thing about the Mayo Clinic, you don't see one doctor. You sit down with half a dozen doctors, and they all talk to you, and they look at it from their perspective. Can we do that with agriculture? I think we can. I think we can come up with these solutions. I think we can push the science forward. I think we can think outside the box. I think we can develop the new agriculture that's able to be resilient to these changes in climate that we're facing. And one thing you have to ask yourself is, when we do this, we can get, as scientists, we can get lost in interesting discussions. What you have to keep in mind is, what is success going to look like when we do this? So this staffing a la Mayo Clinic model, I think, is the way to look for our ability to face these challenges. Because ultimately, climate change is a challenge to our sustainability. And how I like to define sustainability is the way the National Academy did it in 2010. They defined sustainability by its goals. Satisfy human needs for food, feed, fiber, and contribute to biofuel. Human needs means quantity and quality. Enhance the environmental quality and the resources base. Sustain economic viability of agriculture. In our system, producers have to be able to make a living. They have to be able to make a profit. So if we can increase that range between input costs and price realized, we'll contribute to sustainability. And enhance the quality of life for farmers, farm workers, and society as a whole. Some people think that last one is just an outcome of the upper part, but if you look at the infrastructure that goes with agriculture and some of the opportunities we have out there in the future, I think that will contribute to the quality of life. The nice thing about these things is that you can quantify each one of these things. So we have a built-in set of metrics to determine how well we're doing facing these challenges of agriculture. So with that, I'll close and put the idea of forming communities, exactly what these types of interactions are supposed to do, out there as a priority for us. And with that, I thank you.
Okay, So in your analysis by your peers, and you got into discussions of future, say, nutrient depletion in soils because of longer growing seasons, etc., does that imply that, in fact, other than the new types of fertilizers that you addressed in the end, that the total fertilizer applications will likely go up? And the reason I bring that up, I'm not in the ag community, but I'm in the environmental community, and water quality then becomes even more of a problem for us in terms of extreme events, removing nutrients from the crop fields to the water instead of into the crops themselves. So did your group address fertilizer use in the future?
Not really. No, we did look into that. However, this is conjecture. If you look at the precision agriculture movement, you're essentially able to realize the same yields with less fertilizer input. With precision agriculture, you can identify sensitive areas within the field that you want to avoid putting fertilizer into, because it will reduce what is lost to the surrounding areas. So if we do this smarter, and if we do this with new types of more efficient fertilizers and more effective ways of applying it, I think we can see a reduction. I think the potential is there. I think to meet our yield goals and our profitability, the economic viability, we're going to have to.
I have a question. So, I want to look at different environments for these row crops. Is there anybody in the ARS who might be developing a shade crop? Crop that grow lighter?
Yes, as a matter of fact, Kim Lewis here at Bark was one of the non-climate change researchers we invited to be one of our co-authors. She's doing work extending the growing season of strawberries, for example. She has these low tunnels that basically maintain the temperature. And in the process of working with the group, developing their part of the chapters on the effects of climate change on specialty crops, she got thinking about her tunnels and hadn't thought about light intensity. And as if you look at the history of strawberries, they were basically, edge of forest types of species. So she's now looking at that. Can we get better strawberries by reducing the light intensity to improve the quality of the product, and since you're in a controlled environment in terms of temperature, can we lengthen the growing seasons? So yes.
I'm intrigued by your Mayo Clinic model, and I was wondering, for any of these great challenges, who adopts it? Or can you say something about the parameters, expertise, specialists, and secondly, how do you make
That's a very good question.
Repeat that.
The question was, for this Mayo Clinic model, how do you do that? Who are the leaders? Who are the docs? And how do we go about it? That's a good question. It kind of describes my job. I mean, I spend most of my time putting together teams and effective resources to get this done. I use tools. I use white papers, for example. Okay. I sit down with my colleagues and we kind of brainstorm, or we go through a formal process from the social sciences. Okay, I like to steal good ideas wherever I can find them, and that includes how to operate. And we come up with an approach, and you invite people that have expertise in areas that you would like to work with, are respected, or all of the above who happen to be colleagues. So I think we have to use some of the knowledge that we're gaining from other sciences, social sciences, management, leadership, and things like that, and employ them with the scientists. If you look at a lot of these techniques, they haven't been used with scientists a whole lot. You look at the leadership, literature, and management and stuff, there's very little about dealing with scientists. And scientists are creative people. I view scientists the same I view musicians and artists. You have creativity and technical expertise, and you have ego you have to deal with. Okay? I know I'm a scientist, I know what I'm talking about. So I think that's a good topic for discussion. How do we do this? For my scientists, I like white papers to bring them together. Okay, here's the topic, here's the challenge. How would you approach it? Tell me what's in the literature and give me some of your ideas. What would success look like in the future? Okay. And that's a big question a lot of us don't look at. And how, if you have an idea of success in the future, you know what works in the past, you take these two factors and use that to build your team, to build your approach, and then figure out how to keep going. I think that's the way to go. That's just my experience. I'm sure there's other models.
I really like seeing the M with the G and T. And I guess I have just a question that ties into the previous question. And so the previous question was, how do we do this? And the Mayo Clinic model. And I guess, I mean, here we are trying to build bridges between USDA and University of Maryland, and that's just one E, so to speak. And we're trying to build this G by E by M research. And so obviously ARS has a unique model in that we have these base funds and potential sites that can coordinate. How do we see this moving forward in today's funding climate where the funding streams and the types of funding options are just not promoting this type of science and this type of interaction, as it seems to me?
That's a good question. The question is how to go forward, and the funding models are not out there. I've seen a trend in some of the funding organizations for multidisciplinary teams, the big emphasis being on outreach and extension. I think a good holistic solution will catch the attention of our colleagues who review these types of proposals. And I think if we can demonstrate this in the literature, by talking to your colleagues at meetings or in the halls, demonstrate some things that show how these different disciplines coming together come up with solutions. So I think we need some success stories on a small scale. My experience working with the climate community is a good example. Some of the things I developed using for remote sensing in terms of retrieving parameters on the Earth's surface went right into general circulation models. And the team was successful in improving temperature predictions for areas of Canada that were typically off by 10 degrees in the nighttime. So when you had some ecologists, you had some climatologists and microclimatologists, remote sensing specialists, computer scientists that put together a value chain, basically. Here's the basics, here's how we put it into use, here's how we employ it, and then here's how we deliver it. So that's one model we can look at. And I think some success stories up front that look at things outside the box will help.
Charlie, my question is also in sort of following up on Don's and my friend Ryan's question. What is the legislative support, say, for GE and M issue, specifically climate change? I know politically, politicians on state and federal level, they talk about it. But what is the support really to get, as you know, to put that Mayo Clinic colleagues together in one room, all the docs? We're going to need resources to be able to conduct the research necessary to be able to prove that GE and M works, a balanced approach. So, on your comments.
I think the policymakers and politicians aren't aware of it. I think there's a disconnect between what they see in terms of particular science that's being pursued and the questions that we're getting from the producers, for example. I think there's a disconnect. And so I think we need to educate everyone on this approach. I mean, if you talk to the farmers about using this G by E by M, they're ecstatic because they said, well, that's all my decision making right there. So I think it's a matter of education and, like I said, some success stories. That would be my approach, but I don't think they're aware of it.
Well, I think one success story that you could point to is the green revolution. I mean, there's certainly some challenges with it, but at the same time, that was a G by M at least. You might not have had the E as much in there, but it certainly was G by M. There's a lot of M. And so it wasn't just the genetics that did that. There was, what came out of that, there's also a fairly radical social movement that came out of that was research-based, that was based on farming systems research and extension. There's a whole international precedent for all this.
I agree. I mean, if you talk to most agricultural scientists who aren't working in the genomics realm, they will point to the undervaluation of fertilizer technologies that accompanied the Green Revolution. You know, the development of organic farming. I mean, we can learn a lot about soil from organic farming researchers in the community on what's going on in soil, on how you treat it, based on how you treat it. So, yeah, point well taken.
I think the real challenge to the G by M by E research is the environment part, because the genetics and the management you can have a lot of control over, but the environment you don't. So you sort of have to take what comes, except for say irrigation. But things like temperatures, it's hard to find to do experiments with temperatures elevated from just natural environment, because it's just not, some of the temperatures just aren't there now. So coming around, that's really what makes it.
That's where when you look at the cost of research, for example, the specialized chambers that say, you know, our respective organizations use for climate change research, they're expensive. And they're finicky. Having worked with them, and you know, they break down every 2 days, you know, there's something going on. And then you have the outdoor chambers, which are also expensive, which are, you know, there's been some developments in the technology to make it a little easier to do. But yeah, the environment is the issue. I mean, how many different variabilities can you set up as scenarios? So, point well taken. It's a tough one.
Question, Dr. Walthall. I'm curious about the farmers, you've alluded to it. How do you feel the farm community has bought into climate change models as a whole? Do you think the farmers are at the cusp of it, or just curious?
It's kind of strange. I'm talking to my scientists and then talking to a few farmers being out in the field or at meetings. They will talk a line where you know, climate change is nothing, it's all made up. Until they get hammered by an extreme event or something that's insidious like a pathogen or an insect or something creeps up on them. And then they start thinking. And they come to the scientists, they come to the extension people, they come to their colleagues and neighbors and say, you know, I'm experiencing this, you know, what's going on? So they're more and more receptive. And they're very receptive if they've experienced a critical loss in their economic viability, to put it mildly. So they're coming around, they're starting to listen. The authors of the report that I work with are getting more and more invitations to talk to producer groups, to commodity organizations, to conservation groups as well. So I think the farming community is coming around. I know the ranchers and the people out west are well aware of it. Although they like to talk cows, you know, when you're raising cows via grass grazing, you're not raising cows, you're raising grass and using cows to harvest it. So you focus on the environment, the ecology. there's a growing recognition and they're more apt to talk about it. It's just that the phrase climate change is emotionally charged. It's the way it's been handled politically and in the media. So I think we may need to change our vocabulary a little bit as we move into this new resilient agriculture.
That's great. I think we're going to move on to our next speaker. We give Dr. Walthall a round of applause. Thank you very much.